Hi, I'm Arthur, and yeah, it's been a ride, right? This video is probably going to be one of my more ambitious ones, so let's get to it. A while back, I tried and failed at an Iceberg video series, breaking down this goddamn monstrosity right here, which has been the bane of my existence ever since. I have such a vocal minority of people ever since screaming at me to get this list done, and, well, here we are. I thought for you all, my little dumplings, it would be a fine way to celebrate 100,000 subscribers. I'm going to make this long-ass video for you and hopefully get it out on time. With the aid of 2 editors this time instead of 1, hi Alice, hi Grom, I'm going to cover one of the most in-depth pieces of lore material I've ever read. But before we get into the contents of this video, what exactly is the Iceberg meme? If you haven't been on the internet before, the Iceberg meme is basically this concept of going layer by layer about a concept, and each layer represents a certain depth to that concept, starting from the top with the surface level material that you'd know at a glance, and then at the bottom, the most obscure shit that you've never heard of in your entire life. This video is going to kill me. I'm not kidding, as I think most of my knowledge taps out around layer 7, or at least it did the first time round, so after doing a little bit more deep learning about everything that I need to for this specific iceberg, I think I'm gonna be fine. Let's make this a little game though. I can almost bet my life that every single one of you would not know every goddamn thing on this list. And if I'm right, you subscribe. If I'm wrong, I don't know, dislike the video and call me something horrible in the comments. But regardless, I can guarantee you that you don't know everything on this list, because a lot of these caught me. I didn't even know the names of some of these things. Also, if you're a longtime fan, I'll be making some announcements towards the end of this video that might be important for you to hear. So stay tuned to that. Or just skip to like the last 10 minutes of the video. I'm not the police of you could do whatever you want. One last thing before I hop into the first layer of this video, I have a sponsor for once, which is wild. And much like pretty much every other sponsor, I really like what they have to show, but I think if you're a 40k fan specifically, or just a tabletop gamer in general, you're going to like this too, so please hear me out. I've been playing a lot of the Horus Heresy recently, and by recently I mean kind of just over the last 6 months. I have been kind of going at this escalation game with a good friend of mine. He plays Dark Angels, and I'm playing Iron Warriors. We have been kind of getting up there in points, and I've been noticing something. As someone who doesn't drive, it is kind of a pain in the ass for me to actually transport my miniatures from my home to the game store, which it's about a 15-minute walk, but regardless, when you're getting up there in points, it's difficult. But with the help of the fine folks at Tabletop Stronghold, it's kind of not even an issue anymore. See, what they offer are these amazing magnet-based cases with steel shelving that you can magnetize the bases of your miniatures to and then stick them to it, which means they barely move during transport, and I've never seen any shift or any broken miniature ever since, which, considering I 3D print miniatures, is normally pretty common. So because they approached me to promote the MagCase 2.0 for the holiday season, I had to say yes, because again, I'm always there to support the community, and you guys are 40k fans, so obviously at least some of you are going to have miniatures that need transport, and this is just one of the best options I've ever seen. Not to mention, it's a one-man operation, and considering how fast and efficiently it got to me, that really says to the level of passion that the creator must have for this. I never really got cases back in the day, but now that I actually have one, I don't think I could ever go back. So if you want to support me, as well as support the hobby, and also just get yourself a good case, then click the link in the description or the pinned comment and pick yourself up the MagCase 2.0. As you can see from what's showing on screen right now, it's sleek, it's easy to use, and the shelves in general are just very adaptable to whatever size miniature you want to bring with you. And considering I'm bringing an Iron Circle Domitar with a hammer that is known to snap off at any interval, is kind of a godsend. With their various holiday sales and Black Friday sales going around, this is probably one of the best times to pick up one of these for yourself, and it's even a good gift for that special someone who's also into wargaming. So, once again, use my link in the description or the pinned comment, and if you grab something, feel free to let them know Arthur sent you. With all that being said, let's get back into the iceberg. Layer 1, the clear skies. Space Marines are the bread and butter of the 40k setting. To condense a literal landfill's worth of useless information, a Space Marine is essentially the perfect shock troop. a genetically modified kind of cyborg, kind of not, that was made from a male child selected usually between the ages of 10 and 14 to undergo multiple surgeries over the next 10-ish years. These surgeries make them taller, faster, hardier, smarter, and weirdly enough incredibly servile, and also can spit acid from their mouth like a cobra. The genetic code and gene modifications depend on the chapter that they hail from. These chapters are descended from legions, which are numbered 1 to 20, each one of these 20 being the base genetic stock to create a Space Marine. Ultramarines are basically the poster child subfaction of the poster child faction of 40k. They are the 13th Legion of the original 20 Space Marines, and are known for being the perfect generalists, as they strive to be the best at everything. Are they? Not really, but they are pretty damn good at almost everything across the board, even as far as Space Marines go, studying a wide manner of subjects outside of war, including politics and philosophy. They do have a bit of a controversial history involving them being overrepresented and having a lot of favoritism dedicated to them when people don't really like them, but I've always liked them. Necrons are a race of hyper-advanced sentient and sapient robots made of mostly indestructible metal known as necrodermis. They are originally a flesh and blood species of death-obsessed Egyptian aliens that tried to fight god frogs, but it didn't work at first. We'll cover that a little bit later, but they're the most advanced species in the entire setting, having technology so strong that it could blank out suns on a whim. Though, they do have a lot of nerfs to them that keep them kind of in line, mainly that most of them have lost their mind due to them being in hibernation for millions of years and are only waking up now. Orcs are the funnest faction in the entire setting of 40k. A race of sentient fungus made into the most orky orcs of all fiction. They love fighting, they like eating, and everything else is kind of secondary to the main goals of getting into a good scrap. The main thing to focus on here is their weird metal weapons that no one truly knows how they work. All of their tech is usually impossible to understand if you're not an orc, and a lot of other factions just chalk it up to orcoid magical bullshit as to why it works, which is, I don't know, partially true. They have smaller substrains for their fungal whatevers, known as like the Gretchen, which are basically just goblins, and Squigs, which are, I don't know, but that dude seems chill. I like that guy. Eldar are elves in space. They have a high degree of mastery over most arts, be it traditional or carving a dude up with a chainsword. They are an old and proud race with a long storied history of fucking up the entire universe through means of them accidentally birthing a chaos god into reality. Which is, okay, if it was any other god other than Slaanesh, I'd be a little bit more understanding, but it's Slaanesh, so I'm not. They are a dying race, as they are avoiding their doomed fate at the hands of Slaanesh, while also fighting off various other factions of the universe. Though they do have a strained relationship with the Imperium, they do have a track record of working with humanity to accomplish common goals. The Tau are the youngest race in the universe, barely establishing themselves as a spacefaring race within the last couple thousand years, but you gotta give them credit. They took what they had and ran with it. They have some of the most quickly advancing pieces of tech in the history of 40k, although not on Necron tier, it is Necron tier. Although not on the same level as some of the other more technologically advanced factions in the setting, they have access to some of the best long-range weaponry in the tabletop, as well as just in the setting in general. Unfortunately, they're kind of kept in bay at the fact that they're kind of just a small faction. Oh, also, side note, you like Gundam? Because I got those. Chaos is a concept. Basically, if there is a psychic presence or an emotion felt, there is a good chance that if it is strong enough, it is going to lend power to the weird psychic chaos entities that exist in a weird anathema dimension. Chaos is basically just the collection of various evil emotion psychic ghosts that got so powerful that they became aware, and also gods. Through this, the Chaos Gods were born, and each one represents a different emotion. The four main flavors of chaos are Khorne, anger, rage, and passion; Nurgle, stink, stank, stunk, also sadness; Slaanesh, excess, hedonism, and desire; and Tzeentch, trickery, ambition, and being a dick. Tyranids are a hyper-adapted race of megabugs, but that doesn't really cut it in terms of their description. See, the Tyranids have the ability to absorb and recreate elements from any species they consume in their melting pits. Any genetic code that exists, they probably have a sample of it at some point. Because of this, they can take the best parts from each species or even recreate whole creatures with modifications in order to deploy the greatest weapons that are wholly organic in the entirety of the universe. These weapons range from, hey, it's a giant praying mantis, all the way to, why do my teeth itch? The Inquisition is a branch of the imperial government of mankind that specializes in, making sure nothing suspicious is going on. Basically, they are the secret police with unlimited authority and mostly unlimited resources to do whatever they deem necessary. Divided into different orders who have different responsibilities, usually around either demons or aliens. It's their job to root out evil wherever it may be, and if all comes to fail, they just blow up a few planets and hopefully they can just start over. Heresy jokes are kind of a relic of a bygone era, or maybe I just don't talk to people who use them that often and I should probably get out of my house more. But basically, if you play Warhammer 40k in person with other people, there is a good chance that you will hear someone scream heresy at the top of their lungs. It is kind of a running joke as it's a very commonly used term in the setting of 40k. With that being said, I never really found it was funny. Even online, it was overdone for quite some time. Or rather it was, I don't think I see it as much anymore because I think people are finally learning to laugh at other things that aren't just saying the funny word. I never thought it was funny, as I said, but comedy is subjective, but I'm also always right. The Adeptus Mechanicus is an offshoot organization linked with the Imperium of Mankind. This organization is kind of propped up by its weird offshoot religion of the normal Imperial Creed, seeing the Emperor as a god. Instead, they see him as the Omnissiah, a representation of the machine god that they worship. Yeah, they're tech-obsessed weirdos who constantly graft on V8 engines instead of lungs, and just every manner of technology they can put into their bodies, they do so. Having a tradition of never inventing, but only remixing the stuff that they already have, they also provide for the majority of the Imperium's fabrication needs through their manufactories of both weapons, armor, and Gundams. Titans. Gundams. The Imperial Guard are the backbone of the Imperium's military, likely due to GW not having an easy time copywriting the name Imperial Guard. They are now kind of referred to as the Astra Militarum, but in general, they are us, the unwashed masses, given a decent rifle by today's standards and a pretty shitty flashlight by 40k standards. These fellas die in the billions and have billions to spare. They come in a variety of different cute regiments depending on the planet they come from, and pick your poison is the best way to describe them, as they have different flavors for whatever ails ya. The Death Corps of Krieg are a massive regiment of Imperial Guard that hail from the planet of, you guessed it, Krieg. They are a fan favorite regiment due to their gas mask World War I aesthetic. Their lore is very interesting, as due to a massive debt due to half of their planet rebelling against the Imperium thousands of years ago, the remaining Krieg that exist on the planet Krieg actually view themselves as having an eternal debt to the Imperium, meaning that no matter what happens, they feel they always owe more than they can give. They see death as a release and a way to finally repay their debt, as death is the greatest service that one can offer. This enthusiasm is both a good thing and a bad thing, as it often gets in the way of people trying to do their job. So they're a good regiment to have in high numbers, as well as just getting the job done no matter the losses, but they're not great for the morale of other people they work with. Oh, they also like trenches. The Sisters of Battle are basically the lady equivalent of the Space Marine. Though not so much modified genetically or physically, the Sisters of Battle have more or less the same gear. They are a hyper-religious organization who believe the Emperor is a god and will fight for what they believe is his grand vision. They often can perform what can be only described as miracles through sheer willpower, psychic force, actual divine intervention, but outside of that, they're a very aesthetically pleasing faction with white-haired women carrying bolt guns and very, very ornate power armor. They're also, never forget this, 100% butt fucking sane. Hive worlds are kind of a concept that exists in our world. Think Kowloon or some shit. I know I said that wrong, but just leave me be. Basically, megacities with minimal spaces are placed throughout a planet. These cities can hold hundreds of billions of people in them as they dig deep into the earth and stretch high into the sky. They're sort of tightly cramped, spiral patterned cities. Hive worlds are where you have multiples of these hive cities located on it. They have a bunch of different reasons for existing, ranging from recruitment into the guard, as we need bodies for that, workers for other worlds, or just habitation for your average imperial human. But in general, the living conditions in hives are always dog shit, no matter where you are, unless you're in the absolute top echelons of the hive. But regardless, they are a very useful world to have, and because there's multiple of these hive cities on a hive world, they can have impossibly high populations. Layer 2, the tip of the iceberg. The Golden Throne is some ancient piece of barely knowable technology on Terra. Xenos in origin, most likely, and is basically a mainstay of the entirety of the culture of the Imperium. It's kind of important as A, it creates the psychic beacon that psychers and navigators can use to pass through the warp using warp travel and not die horribly. And B, it's also kind of a life support system that is currently sustaining the Emperor of Mankind, who is the ruler of all humanity and is also kind of important if you couldn't tell. It's slowly decaying day by day, and the entire Imperium is working to get it to, not. Because nothing good can come from the Emperor dying. Primarchs are the Emperor of Mankind's attempt to essentially make 20 weaker clones of himself in order to control the stars. These clones were handcrafted by him, and turned out to be more or less on the same level of incredibly powerful across the board, though not nearly as strong as him in most regards. We only know technically about 18, and even then, the 18 also includes a set of twins, so it's technically 19. It's complicated. It's complicated is what it is. The gene seed of Space Marines comes from these 20 Primarchs, and thus Space Marines inherit certain genetic and physiological traits from their Primarchs. Gene Stealer cults are one of the best weapons the Tyranids have in order to take over worlds, starting with what else? A pure strain Tyranid known as a Gene Stealer. These entities can infect individuals with a payload of Gene Stealer DNA. This DNA causes their offspring to look horribly fucked up, as they are mostly Gene Stealer, but a little whatever the original species was, with successive generations afterwards creating more and more offspring that look like their mother race rather than the Gene Stealer. The point to all this? To infiltrate and destabilize the civilization and culture of a planet and make it prepped for Tyranids to invade and consume it. The people usually do it with a lot of gusto as they're under Tyranid weird hypno bug magic. The Trainer Legions are a group of 9 of the original Space Marine legions that during a civil war 10,000 years in the past seceded from the Imperium, usually for their own reasons, though mostly to side with Chaos and do their own shit. They kinda lost the war and now are corrupted by Chaos worship and are dedicated to the majority of the gods. Each of the 9 legions were kind of messed up to begin with, so it makes sense that they kinda turned evil. If you want to know more, I do have a video series covering every single Space Marine Legion in order. You should check it out. Yes, this is a shameless plug, and yes, those videos are like a year old, and I'm definitely significantly better at making them by now. I should probably update those, but I don't care. It's my fucking video. The warp is basically this massive alternate reality. See, being psychic in the 41st millennia is kind of a natural thing for most races. Some less so than others, but in general, if you are alive and conscious, you have, I guess, a psychic echo in this alternate reality. It's a blank void where it is filled with the color of people's consciousness. This kind of thing is best exemplified by a match in the dark. The more psychic you are, the brighter your flame, and because there are trillions of people in the universe, the warp is basically a chaotic hellstorm of nothing but emotional energies, and it's really hard to explain. It's basically a swirling vortex that instantly kill you but sometimes help you. In summation, it's an alternate universe created by the collective psychic consciousnesses of all living beings. It's where chaos is, and it's kind of where if you believe in something enough, it becomes a living entity, which is disconcerting. The Catan are basically the opposite of the Chaos Gods, where the Chaos Gods represent intangible concepts, things that most people feel but in different ways. The Catan are ancient gods that represent tangible ideas, like rocks and death and shit. These gods need to exist for the concepts they represent to exist. Disclaimer, this is never confirmed. I just think it's true due to how it's represented in the lore. And when they are truly destroyed, bad shit tends to happen, usually to those who destroyed them. The majority of the Catan were shattered into smaller shards of themselves so that they aren't completely destroyed, and these shards are used as infinite power sources by the Necron. The return of Gilliman is kind of an old concept that is dating this Iceberg quite a lot, but Gilliman is one of the 20 Primarchs, the Primarch of the Ultramarines no less. He was stabbed by a poisoned blade by his brother and fucksnake Fulgrim before passing out and put into a temporal stasis field, which basically held him in place for 10,000 years. He has awoken, and after a disconcerting amount of paperwork, he is ready to kick ass and reclaim the majority of the Imperium and bring back some of the lost ground that was given throughout the 10,000 years that he was taking a big nap. Side note, I might as well add this, the Lion is also back, who is the Primarch of the First Legion. So that's a thing. Trazyn the Infinite is a Necron archivist of the Nihilak dynasty. He is also one of the most fan-favorited characters in the setting, as his whole gimmick is to keep himself occupied and properly stimulated. He goes on these little trips to collect things. And what kind of things does he collect? Anything. People, items, relics, trading cards, entire moments in time, which he can freeze and plays. Yeah, he does that. He's also one of the deuteragonists of the Infinite and Divine, which is a very fantastic book, and you should definitely read it if you haven't. Okay, Psychers is just a shorthand way of describing psychics in the setting of 40k. It's not really that complicated. They pull their powers from the warp and manifest things through psychic beliefs and thoughts. They're usually insane or dead or possessed by a demon, which is not good. Catachan Jungle Fighters are a specialized regiment of the Imperial Guard, focused on guerrilla fighter tactics as well as jungle warfare. The planet they were raised on is like the movie Predator, but instead of just one predator, it's a lot of them. Oh wait, that means it's like Predators. I forgot that was a film. And that was a good movie. I'm getting lost in the sauce here. But there is a distinction. Instead of them being hunted and savagely murdered, they have essentially become one of the buffest and hardiest regiments of guardsmen in the universe. And no, I will not say Catachan. I say Catachan intentionally just to piss people off. The Adeptus Custodes are the elite of the elite for the Imperium of Man. Originally created as the perfect guardians for the Emperor, the Custodes actually make Space Marines look like children most times in combat. They are incredibly powerful, and you know how I mentioned that the Ultramarines tried to be the best at everything, but end up basically just being pretty good at everything? Yeah, the Custodes are the best at everything. They are genetically crafted from the ground up as babies to become the perfect warriors, and their creation process is mostly a mystery, but it is very different from how a Space Marine is created. Needless to say, not exactly anything you'd want to fight. Abhumans are humans that developed on other planets over thousands of years, being separated from traditional humans from Holy Terra. Having changed over the years due to environmental stresses, it can lead to some weird shit like ratlings, which are basically just hobbits, ogrins, which are ogres, and beastmen, which are beastmen. They are often used throughout the Imperium for jobs and minor tasks due to their hyper-specialized evolutionary abilities, ranging from operations like sniping for ratlings, bodyguards for ogrins, and target practice if you're a beastman. Yeah, it kind of sucks to be a beastman in the 40k setting. The Dark Eldar are the Eldar, but evil. See, when Slaanesh happened, the Dark Eldar decided it was a good idea to just double down on the whole hedonism cruelty thing, so they banded together in a massive webway city known as Kamara. This place is a den of experimentation as well as torture. See, being in the presence of pain causes the Dark Eldar to become invigorated and also rejuvenated. Thusly, they go on raiding parties to kill and capture more and more people for their own survival, as well as just for fun. Layer 3, Beneath the Surface. There are no good guys in 40k is something that people who only wear sweatpants and graphic tees say in order to sound smart when talking about 40k lore, reducing the various factions of the setting down in such a reductionist way that they want there to be clear-cut good guys and bad guys, which is such a dumb way of looking at it. I don't even know what the argument here is. But in most stories made for adults that I've been reading, sure, there can be outlineable good and definable evil when it comes to like stories, but in 40K it's kind of weird to just reduce it down to that level. And I never really got the sentiment, though I do kind of like making fun of it. And if you do reduce it down to that level, you're dumb and I hate you. The Horus Heresy was a massive civil war that broke out in the year 30K. This war essentially saw one of the 20 Primarchs, Horus Lupercalis, secede from the Imperium under the corrupting influence of the Chaos Gods. This caused 8 other Primarchs to side with him, with the 9 remaining siding with the Emperor. The repercussions of the Horus Heresy are so long-lasting as to be impossible not to see the impact of they have on the modern setting. The Wolfen are a mutation that happens when a member of the Space Wolves Legion of Space Marines gets a bit too lost in the sauce. It is a gene curse that can come out at any time, and has only become more rampant recently with the resurgence of Wolfen from... It's a long story, but Leman Russ led an expedition into the Eye of Terror, and some weird Space Wolf mutants came out. These mutant Space Wolves are far stronger, faster, and more feral than their regular counterparts, with more beast-like, almost werewolf-like traits associated to them. They make great weapons, but they make terrible soldiers. Sly Marbo is a member of the Catachan Jungle Fighters and is a living legend. He is one of the best hit-and-run fighters in the setting and is able to ghost kill an entire camp of orcs before they even know what happened to them. Fun fact, his name is actually a reference to Rambo, as Marbo is an anagram for Rambo, and Sly is actually shorthand for the name of the actor who played Rambo in the movies, Sylvester Stallone. Servitors are one of the more grimdark staples of 40K. Basically, if you need a laborer for the Imperial work plant that you own, and you're short on staff, but also you don't want to pay anyone, you get a lobotomized servitor custom fit for the job. Half the time, they are vat-grown, sort of organic people made just for the job of being servitors, but the other half of the time, they're actually either criminals or people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, who did a little whoopsie and now they're lobotomized and cleaning doors for the rest of their unnatural life. Space Wolves are furries is kind of an unfunny meme from a bygone era, as the early folk of 40K were so starved for good humor that just because the Space Wolves have a lot of wolf motifs to them, it must mean they're furries, right? Literally, when on Earth have they worn anything that resembled a furry? Okay, that was one fucking time and you... Huh, maybe Space Wolves are furries. The Great Game is in reference to the fact that the biggest thing keeping the Chaos Gods in check is the other Chaos Gods, as they are constantly competing with each other in order to see who is the strongest, who will rise above, as Chaos Gods wax and wane in power in the rankings of who they are, taking control of different dominions. The game never ends, but it's all just a bunch of power plays between 4 warring old gods that want to control the universe. They usually use pawns in the form of mortals to get their jobs done, so, you know, that's kind of what's going on right now. The Istvan 3 atrocity and the Istvan 5 Dropside Massacre are basically when the Horus Heresy kicked off, where on Istvan 3, the loyalist remnants of the traitor legions were forced into a faux military campaign where they were deployed on Istvan 3, thinking that there was an enemy there, only to be virus bombed by the traitor remnants to clear them out from their legion. And the Istvan 5 Dropside Massacre was basically a counter-assault of a few loyalist legions that were sent to capture Horus. They got a tip-off from a few other legions that worked with them that turned out to be traitor legions that hadn't gone full mask off yet. This ended up with a lot of Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands being killed, as well as Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, being killed himself. The loyalty of Alpharius and Omegon has always been a bit of a meme, but for the uninformed, they are the twin Primarchs of the Alpha Legion. They were warned by a super alien mega cults before the outset of the Horus Heresy that if they were to side with Horus during the heresy, humanity would be wiped out, but the universe would be saved from the threat that is chaos. But if they sided with the Emperor and fought for him directly, the Emperor would be grievously wounded in a fight with Horus, the Imperium would survive, but it would lead to eons of decay. This decay causing chaos to grow fat and powerful off of the suffering of millions upon millions of lives. Now, it gets interesting when you find out that their legion ended up siding with Horus, but the Emperor ended up getting injured anyway, which is weird, and that shouldn't have happened. Orcs are fungi. I mentioned it before, but yeah, orcs are born from spores that go into shady-ish places and grow a whole manner of different orcoid species. It doesn't take much for an orc civilization to thrive, as all you need is one dead orc and boom, thousands of spores. Kamara is a massive city that the Dark Eldar are currently shacked up in. It is also probably the worst theme park you could ever visit, or ever want to visit, as it's filled with Dark Eldar, which if you haven't caught the memo or haven't been paying attention, Dark Eldar fucking suck. The Old Ones are an ancient species of hyper-intelligent frog people that basically are so psychically gifted that they could sculpt entire civilizations, creating species from the ground up just with their arcane knowledge, which is pretty much their gift to the universe, being able to seed new races and hopefully watch them from afar. And they were trying to do that until the war in heaven was when the Old Ones refused to cure the cancer or fix the star causing the cancer around the Necron tier, which, if you couldn't tell by the name, is the race that eventually became the Necron. The war in heaven involved the Old Ones creating a bunch of shadow armies. Species like the Eldar, the Orcs, and so on that had specialties that the Necron tier could encounter even when they turned into the Necron. It ended with the decisive loss of the Old Ones, but the Necron ended up going into hibernation for millions of years, leaving the Orcs, the Eldar, and a few other smaller races to kind of thrive in the area. The Shamans created the Emperor is an old creation myth for the Emperor of mankind, where people believe that he was created by the collective psychic minds of a bunch of powerful perpetuals and psychers known as the Shaman. They saw that the warp, which was a place that they could reincarnate from, was becoming cloudy. In order to prevent it from claiming them as they died, they all decided to fuse their minds and spirits together to become the Emperor of mankind, who hid away from society until he was needed most. The Black Rage and the Red Thirst are the main gene curses of the Blood Angels. The Red Thirst being a constant desire to actually consume blood. This desire causes them to go into a kind of light berserking frenzy that makes them more likely to want to rip something open with their bare hands or with a bladed weapon in order to get the blood flowing, as it were. The Black Rage is complicated but kind of ends up with the same thing but worse. With the death of their Primarch Sanguinius, the Blood Angels now are cursed to sometimes, when they lose themselves a bit too much to the Red Thirst, they begin to hallucinate that Horus, the traitor Primarch that killed Sanguinius, is in front of them, and they are permanently reliving the last things that the Primarch saw before their death, which leads them to be a bit angry. It also leads them to have a stupid, crazy power boost that makes them stronger, faster, and more resilient at the cost of their sanity forever. The Rubric of Ahriman was a ritual spell cast by the Thousand Sons Legion sorcerer Azhek Ahriman. This spell was to prevent a gene curse known as the Flesh Change from consuming his entire legion and turning them into meat blobs. It did in fact do this, but at a cost greater than he was willing to pay. Basically, the less psychically inclined members of their legion were sacrificed and turned into dust that also had a bit of their soul and consciousness clinging to it. These consciousness constructs were attached to the power armor that they were stuck in, while the more psychically inclined individuals of the Thousand Sons became significantly more psychically powerful. The fall of the Eldar is what you get when all your ops go into hiding. You have no one who can oppose you, and you have weapons so powerful that even gods fear to really confront you. So the Eldar were kind of sitting pretty. They didn't really have much to do, so whoopsie poopsie, they fell into hedonism. And their hedonism pretty much got worse and worse and worse until they ended up creating a god, because that's what happens when you are a super psychic race and you feel this one emotion collectively. This created Slaanesh. Slaanesh is a god of desire, hedonism, and doing horrible things to people. So now, unless precautions are taken, when an Eldar dies, their soul is actually claimed by Slaanesh, which I'm told is not fun. So the Eldar are kind of doomed. They can never really thrive as much as they did until Slaanesh dies. Layer 4. The deep waters. Abominable intelligence is a term used by the Imperium. See, after the Dark Age of technology, there was this kind of stigma attached to artificial intelligence, as artificially intelligent constructs rose up and, tried to wipe out the majority of humanity with a great deal of success. We ended up winning the war, and thus using the term abominable intelligence have kind of stigmatized artificial intelligence as a whole. The Men of Iron are the AI robots that rose up during the Dark Age period and kind of almost wiped out the huge swath of humanity, and thus we ended up destroying them and most of our own technology. The Dark Age of technology is a long period of time where humanity was basically at its technological zenith, with tech so advanced and insanely powerful that the only thing we kind of have to compare it to is the stuff that the Leagues of Votann are using right now. The age was also when sentient AI robots tried to destroy humanity. See the last two entries to understand that. The Wa field is weird. Basically, all orcs are passively psychic with no way of controlling it, so when you get enough orcs in an area of Wa, this field is generated, and it's basically a source of infinite energy for all their weapons, technology, and so on and so forth, but it also causes weird psychic shenanigans, like they never really technically have to reload, and their guns, no matter how piddly, kind of can penetrate through most armor. It's kind of the catch-all to explain why orcs can do pretty much anything. Speaking of, Gork and Mork are the gods of the orcs. Are they the same god? Two separate gods? A two-headed, one-bodied god? We don't ever really know, as the orcs tend to worship the two knuckleheads in such a varied way that it's kind of hard to keep track. All we know is that Gork is brutal yet cunning, and Mork is cunning yet brutal, which may not seem like much of a distinction, but I promise you, that kinda is. Caiaphas Cain, and yes, I'm never actually going to call him Caiaphas Cain, that sounds dumb, is God's silliest little soldier. He's kinda a professional at failing upwards in everything he does, graduating with top honors and hoping to get a desk job so he doesn't end up dying in the trenches somewhere. He ended up accidentally getting thrown immediately into the trenches. His supernatural luck is in reference to the fact that, for some reason, he often stumbles his way into a grand victory that, I don't know why, it always leads to him getting more accolades and awards. Jokero are cool as shit, and I fucking love them. They are literally a creation of the old ones that had the task of working with any and every race they meet with the sole intention of making whichever tech they find better in order to kill Necron. They have pocket dimensions on their backs that act as toolboxes, and they are just long-fingered orangutans that are obsessed with technology. And I love them for it. Yes, hell yeah, I love the squats. The squats are the old term the Imperium used to describe the various members of the Leagues of Votann. Back in the day, they were an abhuman subrace that worked in the Imperial Guard, but we've recently found out that those were just mercenaries that worked alongside the Imperium, as they tend to actually do that a lot right now. Now that they've been recently rebooted as the Leagues of Votann, they are considered a Xenos race, and they're one of my favorite, if not my favorite faction in the entire game. I also have a tattoo of the main symbol, which is cool. The Krorks are what the orcs were originally. These individuals were hyper-intelligent orcoid beings that were basically if orcs made space marines. Taller, stronger, significantly smarter, and were made as a weapon to kill the Necron, which both succeeded and failed in its own right. They have kind of devolved due to their weirdly constructed genetics, and now they're just the orcs that we know today. Ha! Okay, so this one didn't age well. But basically, people used to believe that due to the Wa psychic field, Commissar Yarrick, who fought many an orc and even the biggest orc on Armageddon, Ghazghkull Thraka, was immortal as he was seen fighting greenskins with a sword at the age of 80. Unfortunately, it has been confirmed recently that old Baelai did indeed pass on, and Ghazghkull Thraka could not be more upset. Love Can Bloom is one of the weirder entries on this list so far, as it's actually in reference to an old story made in, I believe, the TG boards on 4chan. Correct me if I'm wrong, but basically it's a love story, fan fiction type deal about a relationship between a Vindicare assassin and an Eldar Farseer. It's kind of cringe and a bit of an old head reference, but if you're interested, there is a lot of archives out there about it. Cipher was the rank given to the person in charge of upholding all traditions and customs for the Knights of the Order back on Caliban in the pre-heresy times. The Knights of the Order were the specific order of Techno Knights that Lionel Johnson founded in order to kill the beasts of Caliban. This order ended up being disbanded and absorbed into the Dark Angels, and somehow there's still someone roaming around with the name of Cipher. This individual wears the original black color scheme of the original Dark Angels instead of the current green, and we don't know much about him, but he's incredibly mysterious, and we don't even know if he's loyal or chaotic, but you know, probably both actually. Ynid and the Ynnari are kind of a weird footnote. Basically, there was an old Eldar prophecy that once all the Eldar die, Slaanesh dies with them. There are a bunch of different interpretations to that, and I'm oversimplifying it, but the Maniacs on Bealtan, alongside a few other individuals, it had a weirder interpretation where if they killed enough Eldar and generated enough death energy all at once, something would happen. And something did happen. It partially summoned Ynid, the death god of the Eldar, who was prophesied to probably be able to kill Slaanesh. They never successfully got Ynid to be fully birthed into the world, but they did have a sub-faction mounted towards that prophecy of trying to get Ynid here, and that's the Ynnari, which is a band of Eldar that come from the three different major groupings, which is the regular Craftworld Eldar, the Dark Eldar, and the Harlequins. I don't know what the person who made this iceberg was smoking for this, but like, the only reference I have for the Chaos Gods represent mental disorders is some forum posts made a while back on a bunch of different forums for talking about Warhammer, and they were made about like 20-30 years ago, and they're basically just talking about how Khorne represents violent psychosis, Nurgle is depression, Slaanesh is perversion, which I guess counts, and Tzeentch is obviously schizophrenia. A bit obscure if that's what they're referencing, but I can dig it. Melanids are actually a rare species of abhuman who we don't know pretty much anything about. We literally, I think, only know their name as we haven't gotten any updates about them after the fact. But looking at their name, we could probably figure out exactly what they are. Cat people. The Hrud are one of the most dangerous species in the universe, with their bodies, for some reason, emitting a field of energy that usually speeds up time, aging anything around them to dust. But there has been occasions where it has actually slowed down time or even reversed it, which I think a lot of people often forget. They usually migrate in herds, not trying to really hurt anybody, but just by nature of their own existence, they usually do hurt people. The Cabal is a secret alien conclave of weird species who banded together in order to stop the spread of chaos. It is kind of their only unifying goal. It's led by mostly ancient-ass Eldar who could not be worse with the whole public relations thing if they tried. Though also, people have a vendetta against them as they're the governing body that kind of has to unleash John Grammaticus as a weapon, so yeah, there's that. The Umbra are an especially obscure race of Xenos. We don't truly know what they are, only that they are essentially these weird living black pearls that can control shadows. Which, okay, let's get this straight, they can't control shadows. There is nothing to control. Shadows are the absence of light, so they probably just create artificial shadows and some kind of artificial blackness that they control using some kind of psychic shit to form solid bodies, weapons, and monsters to fight. Layer 5, the depths. The depths. The depths. Why am I having so much trouble with this? The depths. The depths. It's one of those. The tower uplifted by the Eldar is in reference to a not incredibly common conspiracy theory that the Eldar were trying to create the ultimate weapon to kill chaos. So why not create something that could not be seen by them by having weak souls and specialize in the thing that chaos has a hard time dealing with, which is ultra long range weaponry. The theory itself does hold a little bit of water, but it's probably bullshit, so yeah, still fun though. Tuska Demon Killer is a classic orc meme. Basically, an orc who learned that fighting demons was pretty damn fun actually, so he decided to crash land his ship filled with his own personal wall on a Khorne demon world, and on that world he went to town, killing as many demons as possible and living the best life he possibly could. Khorne thinks the dude's kinda radical, which is kind of cool. Heavy Spile's new men are, as you could probably figure out, a creation of Fabius Bile. They are also basically just bigger humans that are stronger, faster, and smarter, but unfortunately they're kind of moralless psychos. What Fabius is trying to do is he's seeding them across the universe into normal human populations so that they'll commingle, reproduce, and then spread their horrible genes across the universe, so he'll eventually override the current strain of humanity. The Great Crusade era orcs are kind of an enigma. Basically, there was a shift in orc culture from what I gather, where the more techie orcs existed back then during the Great Crusade, with a lot more mechs and big mechs that were kind of running the show for the majority of these orc tribes. This led to higher levels of technology and more dangerous weapons that made them harder to deal with. These orc tribes were kind of hunted into extinction, and thus why right now we only have the ones that are ruled by the biggest orc. So war bosses were actually not that common back then because it was actually kind of a negative to have a big lumbering idiot running your tribe. So also fun fact, the Great Crusade era orcs kind of slammed the Emperor for a little bit. It wasn't like a 100% they were winning, but he got surprised, which is interesting. Yeah, Warhammer, yeah, this topic, I can't really say without this video getting demonetized, and there's a lot of effort going into its production, so I'd like to actually have it be seen by people. So as much as I'd love to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight here, I may not be able to talk about it, but basically this is just a reference to one of Major Kill's Patreon tiers where you get a boatload of it. Yeah. The death of Rogel Dorn is a hotly debated topic, as it's definitely under the no body, no kill trope, where I think all we have was his hand, and that's it, which obviously means he's going to be returned to us as a Primarch, and the Imperium's Milky Way sweep shall continue. The origins of the Tyranids are kind of unknown. There's a lot of different theories going around, like maybe they were a last-ditch effort to kill the Necrons and created by the old ones. Maybe they were just some apex predator from a different galaxy that kind of picked up and off from its own home planet just to come here. Kind of like the Dark Continent from Hunter x Hunter. But other than that, we don't know. We don't know exactly what their origins are. We do know why they came to the Milky Way, though, and that's because Barabas d'Antioch and his fun company ended up activating this ancient Necron device known as the Sotha device. Yeah, I know, it was a device on Sotha, we don't really know its real name. But that basically created a beacon that lured the Tyranids to the system. Okay, here's some weird shit. The Alamic Quietude is a faction of humans, sort of, who survived Old Night and the birth of Psychers by grafting their entire nervous system into machines. They are literally just a brainstem and a skull in a robot body. They actually believed that they were the true heirs to humanity and Terra, but unfortunately, if I remember correctly, they had the misfortune of running into the Space Wolves, who had a few things to say about that, mostly murder. The Thyrus are weird little squiddy guys that we know almost nothing about, but the stuff we do know is really fun. Like, how they view war as kind of a production for entertainment, and that they need to perform to entertain themselves and others. So their weapons are usually unwieldy instrument, weird-looking things that shoot a shitload of lasers in different colors like a rainbow to be more performative. Is it useful? No. Do they win a lot of wars? I don't think so, because we don't hear about them that often, but you know what? Good on them. More power to them. First edition Warhammer 40k, or Rogue Trader, is the first time that GW tried to make their little sci-fi game that could. The rules are actually insane in comparison to modern day 40k, with a bunch of random bullshit thrown in, as it's also more of a skirmish game than anything else, but it is a really fun book to read on its own, with some of the older lore being absolutely bonkers by today's standards. It is fun to whip out every now and then and play with the boys, right? I have no idea what old TG not safe for work fanfiction is in reference to, though I feel like the name pretty much infers exactly what is on the tin. So yeah, I never much engaged on 4chan that much, but I assume this is in reference to some rather deplorable shit. Jagatai Khan's location is in reference to the fact that he was chasing after Dark Eldar into the Webway, and that was kind of the last time that we saw him. So he's most likely in Kamara killing shit and getting up to some wacky hijinks, because that kind of seems like his thing. Or he's being tortured horribly day in and day out, and we'll never see him again because the White Scars are not as popular as I really want them to be. Enslavers are one of the worst and most actually horrifying kind of warp-based xenospecies in the setting. See, they live in the warp and they kind of act as a psychic parasite, finding unshielded psychers to kind of burrow their larvae into. These psychic brainworms literally grow and control the minds of the people that they've infested until they get to maturity before breaking open a psychic portal to allow more enslavers to enter real space, and thus the process is both sped up and also in person and worse. Stripping Custodes is a literal reference to if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device, where in said series, the members of the Custodes had been represented by the Pillarmen from JoJo Part 2 with Custodes helmets, which are basically just half-naked, oiled-up, beefy men. Okay, so for context on this next one, when Slaanesh killed and consumed the souls and power of the Eldar Pantheon, there were several gods that managed to escape, one of them being Isha, likely to go somewhere much worse, as Nurgle took an interest in her as she was a god of healing and rejuvenation. Thus, Nurgle likely uses her for his experiments to create the strongest diseases possible and see how it affects her, as she will always regenerate from whatever he does to her. And the Kaban machine was one of the first AI creations that the Mechanicum ever kind of mastered and created. It was first sent to war on the literal outset of the Martian Schism on the side of the traitors. The Kaban machine was sent to basically deal with knights and any specific task that required not so much a delicate hand, but a hateful hand. The Kaban machine was dealing with multiple knights at a time and actually winning. It eventually ended up losing in a very smart play by throwing it off a cliff, but it was still a very interesting device while it lasted, even though it did end up getting scrapped. Layer 6, Black Waters. Obi-Wan Sherlock Clouseau is a hallmark of the Rogue Trader era of 40k, which 40k was originally supposed to be nothing but a bunch of references to contemporary sci-fi and action films of the time. So this fine fellow here is a reference to Obi-Wan Kenobi, of Star Wars fame, Sherlock Holmes of Sherlock Holmes fame, and Clouseau is a reference to Detective Clouseau from the Pink Panther series. The warp-based nature of the Primarchs is kind of a fun piece of trivia. Basically, regardless of how much a Primarch abstains from being psychic, every Primarch is kind of impossibly linked to the warp due to their nature, and also due to them being basically just clones of the Emperor himself, who is an incredibly psychic being. There's also the theory that the Primarchs are powered by the spirits of warp gods whom the Emperor used in their creation, but that's not confirmed. Cypher as a loyalist is a fun theory. See, even though Cypher is more often than not used in Fallen Chaos Marine lists, there is a theory he is Zahariel, an old Dark Angels loyalist Marine, who just so happened to be on Caliban when Luther, during its kind of civil war on the Terrans, happened. Zahariel has a lot of ties to the Order of Caliban, and thus he would rightfully be able to own the title of Cypher without much protest from anyone else. The theory goes on to state that Zahariel is probably working from the shadows with some kind of agenda to help the Imperium of Mankind. The Emperor is dead theory is pretty simple. Basically, the Emperor's body has long since died, and the Golden Throne isn't preserving him, it is trapping his soul and using it to fuel the Astronomicon. And it's also preventing him from reforming. As we all know, the Emperor is a perpetual, so in order to reform, his soul needs to leave his body. The Sanguinor is the Blood Angels' personal panic button, essentially due to all Blood Angels being at least a little psychic, as well as them being covered in the little blood gems you see all over their bodies, which are also psychic amplifiers. When it comes to a great deal of strain, trouble, and praying for salvation, this golden entity will appear to them from time to time, and their fervor fuels it. This is the Sanguinor. The entity resembles Sanguinius with modern armor to reflect modern sensibilities. It's basically just an imperial demon. Speaking of demons, fun fact, Genghis Khan was actually the first human demon prince in the 40k setting. He became a demon prince known as Doombreed, who obviously serves corn. The more you know. Call's true intentions in 40k are pretty damn unknown, as due to a mixture of reasons, it's almost impossible for people to ever really find out what he wants. Him being multiple brains in multiple jars attached to one body, him spreading those brains across the universe to make the Calls inferior. Some think he is trying to become the new Fabricator General because one of the Call inferiors has been saying as such, but he denies it fervently. Some think he is trying to take over the Imperium as a whole. Some think he's a techno traitor who secretly sided with Horus and is just trying to worm his way into more echelons of power. Not many people know the truth. I don't even think he does, really. The Cog Whisperers, or the Children of the Cog, are a subsection of the Machine Gods cult from what I could find, who believe that they can actually speak to the machine spirits inside vehicles. This kind of holds a little bit of water, as it's been displayed that some characters in the setting can actually do that. The most obvious one being the Emperor, who once commanded a knight with a busted leg to fix itself, which, so as not to be rude, it did. Oh, fuck. Okay, this is a big one. The Rangda are an unknown species of Xenos that is responsible for the Rangda Xenocide. We don't know what they are, and the Rangda Xenocide is pretty much one of the biggest what-ifs, unknown whatevers in the entirety of 40k, as we lost a Primarch during it allegedly, and we lost a lot of the legions that currently existed at the time. It is thought that it was actually not a species known as the Rangda, but a coalition between the Crave, which are an incredibly powerful psychic race of pre-War in Heaven Xenos, as well as the Sloth, who are worm men that can passively manipulate the minds of those around them. It would make sense because one of the big theories about the Rangda Xenocide is that mind control played a very big part in it. The Nephilim are a minor race of Xenos who look canonically a bit like Baymax from Big Hero 6. Basically, they come in a variety of different colors depending on how old they are, and they have this weird ability to tear chunks off themselves into little goo piles. These goo piles they can then attach to living beings. We saw it work on humans, where they cover their face and basically give them whatever nutrients they need to survive as long as it's attached, and also brainwashes them to think that this alien species is actually angels from whatever religion that they believe in or whatever religion that they could believe in. Thus, the Nephilim are pretty good at passively taking over planets by seeming peaceful and then weaponizing the militaries of the planet that they end up on. I'm like 99% certain that the Great Khan ended up wiping out all of the Nephilim. I know that Sanguinius kind of softened them up, but I might find them again later in one of my travels of reading bullshit Warhammer books. Ian Watson is one of the first writers for Warhammer 40k to write consistently in the setting, and is known for writing the Draco series of books. He also writes a lot of stuff that is, considered pretty damn weird by today's standards, but yeah, more power to him. The Plague of Unbelief is the name given to the rebellion mounted by Goje Van Dyer against the Greater Imperium. It wasn't exactly a secession, as much of it was Van Dyer taking as much power as he can and going a bit wacky with it, declaring many people heretics that stood in his way, and also for some reason declaring that any of the Sisters of Battle that were to be his personal guard were not allowed to wear shoes in the palace. He also put a lot of security cameras low to the ground so he could get a good look at them, but that's only speculation, so yeah. Layer 7, Pitch Black Seas. Chaos androids are fun. Basically, from an above setting perspective, they are literally just the prototype for the Necron. Because the almost exact models were refitted to be Necron a few years after the release. The in-universe explanation is that they were originally thought to be the creation of the Chaos Squats, which is fun because Chaos Squats means that we might get Chaos Leagues of Votann. Yes, I'm finding a way to make this about the kin. I am all about that life. Mother Gullet is uncomfortable. Basically, Mother Gullet was a Calidus assassin who earned a name for herself by getting a high priority target, which just so happened to be a child out of enemy territory by using her polymorphine to stretch her mouth and stomach to capacity to allow her to swallow the child, and then she left the compound disguised as a rather large woman. The Homunculaba is an experiment that the Iron Warriors embarked upon to create new Space Marines. It is a bit gruesome because it basically used the bodies of women, and that is as far as I can go describing how they were used. They would grind up the bodies of whole dead Iron Warriors and then feed them into the machines that these women became, and from there they would put adolescent boys inside of these artificial birthing pods, and whoopsie poopsie, a fully grown Space Marine would sometimes come out, which is a pretty efficient way of creating them. They would also come out without skin. I'm omitting a few things. You know why. Just leave me be. The Ghoul Stars are my favorite setting in the entirety of the 40k universe. Basically, it's a small cluster of space that it basically breaks every rule that the universe of 40k follows. What do I mean? Well, for one, chaos is kind of rare there, and two, there are relics there from an ancient Xeno civilization that, if you were to use it, could clear small armies. They are so powerful, and the weird things that exist in that galaxy are also fucking weird. Like, there's a full kingdom of nothing but flayed ones and one overlord, an entire planet filled with zombies that aren't related to Nurgle. Man, this shit is fun. I made a video on the War of the False Primarch a while back, but this is a war we don't know too much about. Basically, we know that the Imperium was getting a bit pissy that someone was calling themselves a Primarch and starting to control massive swaths of Imperial territory, and thus they sent off 5 Space Marine chapters to kill it. Which, if you look into which chapters they sent, it kind of goes without saying that, yeah, they did. Ordo Chronos is the specific order of the Inquisition that is responsible for all things related to time, like including finding out what the actual date is, investigating time anomalies, killing as many Hrud as humanly possible alongside the Ordo Xenos. They also, for some reason, tried to capture a Legion of the Damned member one time. They did, it just got out, which is, okay, I'm glad that they could do that, but it means that the Legion of the Damned members are tangible and just wandering around and not some kind of mass psychosis, which is, yeah, I don't want to think about that. The fate of the Night Haunter's soul is kind of up for debate. Okay, not really. It's basically a fan theory that the crown that Kurz was wearing on the eve of his death had an Eldar Spirit Stone in it, which would, in theory, trap his soul in it, meaning that his soul never went to the warp or was dispersed throughout the universe. Theoretically, it means that they could bring him back if they wanted to at some point, but does anybody really want to? The Dark Cells of Terra are the perfect jails hidden at the bottom of the Imperial Palace on Terra. It is guarded by a specific subfaction of the Custodies known as the Shadow Wardens, and in these cells are some of the worst, including possibly one of the Lost Primarchs known as Subject 11. The Screaming, yeah, it isn't a thing. This could be a reference to the Screaming Vortex, which is a minor warp rift similar to the Eye of Terror before it ripped up into the Cicatrix Maledictum, or it's a reference to the Howling, which is where this massive Xenos cyborg psyker whatever, known as the Caco Dominus, killed and controlled billions of Imperial worlds before being slain by the Black Templars. Either way, I don't know. 6319 is one of the weirdest planets in the history of 40k, as it was essentially like Terra, but smaller. On it, there was just like micro versions of what was on Holy Terra. There was even a man who proclaimed himself to be the Emperor of Mankind, even though he was separated from the Imperium of Mankind so long that he would never have known that the Emperor existed. On this planet, there were super advanced super soldiers that were not necessarily Space Marines, but they could turn invisible, and that was kind of their big thing. They did give the Space Marines of Horus's fleet a run for their money, but eventually they ended up killing the Emperor of Mankind, well, the fake one, and then setting up shop on the planet. Another interesting fact about 6319 is this is also where the first documented excursion with Chaos was for Horus's fleet, as there were Chaos cultists set up on the planet worshipping several different demons, and one of them's name was Samus. No, not that one. The Sensei are natural-born descendants of the Emperor, which implies that over the thousands of years the Emperor has been alive, he has indeed fucked, and it scares me to recognize that. He does indeed also have immortal children that are wandering around out there that for some reason members of the Inquisition are gathering up. Artifact 9 Kappa Mu is a cylindrical black object that is rotating around the sun in the Sol system in 40k. No one truly knows what it is, and that's really all we know about it, but it's actually kind of a funny reference to the fact that in our world, like in real life, we actually have something like that. There is an object floating around the sun. We don't really know what it is, but it's always been there. It's kind of cool. There is no real reference to Fenris being an exodite world in the lore, but it is a fun theory. because basically it implies that millions of years ago, the world of Fenris was colonized by Eldar before they ended up fucking off to another planet. It could also mean that the runes on Fenris that have some kind of power to them, able to ward away psychic energies and whatever, are like old Eldari runes that have lost meaning to their current culture. It could be interesting to look into it, but I doubt it's actually anything of note. Dance steps for Space Hulk is really, really funny. Back in the day, before Kill Team, there was Space Hulk, where you made a team of Space Marines and sent them into the Bug Hive to kill Gene Stealers. Dance Steps for Space Hulk was an alternate rule set that came out to talk about how you could play in a different way, and there was lore for it too. With Imperial morale being as low as it was at the time, there was this new initiative to take the elite of the elite in terms of Space Marines and give them dancing lessons, so that when they went in to go kill Gene Stealers, they could dance and show that they were unbothered by the bug monsters. And the images that came to accompany these new rules in the White Dwarf magazine they were located in, fantastic. The Emperor is an agent of chaos is a recently debunked theory that the Emperor is secretly working to further the agenda of Chaos Undivided, but due to the whole thing of him almost turning into a chaos god known as the Dark King, but refusing it last minute, it doesn't really hold water anymore. The Orcs have already won is a fun theory that basically goes on to state that Orcs' only victory condition is to always be fighting no matter what. The Orcs have basically put themselves into a universal state where if ever they want to, they can go fight something. So technically, Orcs have already won. Space Skaven's canon has kind of been a debate for a while, but basically in the early iterations of 40k, I think it was actually the base Rogue Trader rulebook, an image of a Hrud was shown. This image was showing what was literally just a Space Skaven. It looked like a rat under a sheet with a gun. Since then, the Hrud have been retconned, and the Space Skaven have not been mentioned since. Ferrus Manus leading the Legion of the Damned isn't really that obscure, but in a moment of great need when the Emperor was fighting for his dear life in the man-made webway that got destroyed by Magnus, thanks Magnus, a giant headless Legion of the Damned member who was carrying a flaming sword showed up and helped lead the Legion. You could probably guess who that was. It's pretty well known, this entire situation, but it's still cool that it ended up on the list. Layer 8. The Edge of the Abyss. The Omega Vault is absolute lunacy. Basically, the Omega Vault is this massive vault complex in Jericho's Reach, which is the area of space the Death Watch is kind of located. The vault itself is more heavily fortified than the throne room of Terra, and no one can open it, but it sometimes opens up by itself depending on whatever's going on in the universe, leading to a single massive room where there is always something new, just kind of there, ranging from ancient weapons needed for some kind of Xenos threat that's invading an area, to a near-death astropath who sends off one psychic message to an unknown location before dying of old age. The Angel was essentially the prototype for the Primarch project. It was a being of insane power that could decimate cities with ease. The Emperor created the Angel to help with the pacification of Terra, especially to remove certain chaos taint from certain areas of the planet. But the Angel had a problem. Not a drop of chill in his veins. If he thought the Emperor didn't need you, or you weren't showing the correct amount of reverence, you'd immediately be killed and your entire city destroyed. So the Angel ended up being sealed away and the Primarchs were created in its place. The Emperor Planned the Heresy is a fan theory that the Emperor planned out the heresy in order to ascend himself to godhood or accomplish some kind of esoteric goal, though that is unlikely as the Emperor rejected godhood as well as chaos godhood when he was offered it aboard the Spirit of Vengeance to become the Dark King. So there is this theory that Alpharius and or Omegon were raised on Terra and were the first Primarchs to be found by the Emperor. It does hold a little bit of weight, but there is no real way to confirm it, much like with every other goddamn thing the Alpha Legion says or does. The Earl King might actually be a secret warp god we don't really know anything about. Basically, it's a folktale entity that was known on Fenris, a trickster god based off of a similar fey creature in our own mythologies. Leman Russ ended up interacting with the entity in the warp to find a way to kill Horus, and I don't think he's ever been brought up again, or ever since. Likely ever will, actually. Ghazghkull Thraka is a reference to Margaret Thatcher. Okay, this one was actually cleared up a while back. Basically, Ghazghkull's full name is Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, which kind of sounds a little bit like Margaret Thatcher. It's been confirmed that it's just a coincidence, but it is a funny one. Huh. The Sleeper is literally just another name for the angel, which I already covered. It's in reference to the fact that it's currently sealed away rather than being destroyed for some reason. Moloch is a planet that, weirdly enough, is one of the most important planets in 40k, as it's a planet where the Emperor allegedly gained immense power from the Chaos Gods, as well as was shown how to create the Primarchs. He conquered this planet using like 4 Space Marine legions, which is insane to think about, because that's way too much firepower for pretty much any threat. It also is a site where, during the Horus Heresy, the individual of the hour, the Horus, tried to show up to get the same power, but he ended up bungling it pretty bad, so it never really became anything other than that. I'm pretty sure the planet's still around now, so that's probably something that should get blown up. That amount of power should not be easily obtained. The relationship between Khorne and Khaine is kind of simple. I don't know why it's so far down this list. They are basically gods that represent a similar concept and allegedly are similar in power. Because Khaine could straight up fight Slaanesh to a standstill when they were powered up from devouring all the other gods of the Eldar pantheon. But Khorne has shown to be a separate entity from Khaine, as he wanted to consume the soul and power of Khaine for himself. He ended up not, because Slaanesh stopped him, and then Khaine kind of exploded into the craft worlds. Warhammer Fantasy exists within the webway is a really funny theory, because it's basically been a running joke that either 40k exists in a small jar on a wizard's shelf in some place in a fantasy universe, or fantasy is its own planet cut off by warp storms in the 40k universe. They do different variations of this back and forth depending on which setting you're in, but I doubt that there's any weight to it. I doubt fantasy or AOS exists in 40k and vice versa. It's just a really funny reference. The Emperor's true name is something that holds a lot of power, as most people do not know who he is, or who he could even be. Constantine Valdor, for a while, was trying to find out what his real name was, but he never got it. I saw some people online who were trying to suss out what the actual name of the Emperor would have been, and they basically traced it back that he could have been one of the mythological figures from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is cool if it's true. The people at the Black Library could probably pull that reference, and it'd be very appreciated. Omegon was a tulpa is a really funny idea. See, tulpas, in as short a way as possible, are constructs made of pure thought. They are something that if you believe in it enough, it becomes real. So the idea that Omegon was Alfarius' imaginary best friend the whole time is both sad and funny. Chaos Orcs are in a weird spot canon-wise, as there are orcs that in pre-3rd edition, which pre-3rd edition is basically just not canon at this point, that ended up actually worshipping Khorne. They were seen as weirdos by other orcs, but because of how good they were in a scrap, they were often hired as mercenaries. Orcs are technically immune to chaos corruption, as they're just too stupid to actually have any graspable desires that the chaos gods can feed into, and also because they're so psychically powerful, it's just difficult for demons to interact with them anyway. Other than Khorne kind of thinking they're pretty radical just because, Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it does, there really isn't any other connection into modern chaos orcs. Enuncia is the primordial language. It is also incredibly dangerous. It is the root tongue that creates magic and shit. If you were to speak Enuncia, you could reshape reality around you, but if you mispronounce any of these syllables or even letters in a single word, you probably explode. There isn't many examples of people using it, but there are a few. My kind of fan theory, and I don't know if this is actually elaborated on in the fiction, is that it's essentially the language that people spoke before the Tower of Babel, that kind of proto-language that everybody could understand that ended up getting destroyed when God punished us for our hubris. It's probably incorrect, because that's mostly speculation, but I think that's an interesting idea. Malcador is the Emperor is a theory that doesn't hold as much weight, but it is interesting to think that either Malcador is a psychic construct created by the Emperor to basically play nanny to the Primarchs, or the Emperor is a great golden figurehead to rally the universe around, created by Malcador, as both are psychically powerful enough to kind of pull that off. Either way, it's bullshit, but it's fun bullshit. Layer 9, The Abyss. Sigmar is the Star Child is a sentence I feel like if I said it in the wrong circle, it could probably kill someone. Basically, the Star Child is a warp entity of great power, said to be able to grant blessings of a similar scope to Chaos Gods to those who serve the Emperor, or the Star Child. It's not really clear. It is theorized that it is either the kindness of the Emperor gestating in the warp after it broke off from the Emperor, who had to lose it in order to kill Horus, or it is just Tzeentch f***ing around. If it was Sigmar, that would be really funny, though I feel like there are significantly more interesting ideas out there, so there is that. Horus sits on the Golden Throne is a theory that the Emperor is not the one sitting on the Golden Throne. It's actually Horus, which makes literally no sense, as with a lot of interactions with Gilliman in the modern day, it's pretty much confirmed that the Emperor is the one sitting on the throne. Ateanism is a rabbit hole that sent me into a spasmodic fit. Basically, it is a philosophical belief that the pursuit of truth and the one true truth is the most important goal anyone can take. Basically, there is an undercurrent of what is actually correct through all forms of study, be it scientific, philosophical, or artistic. Ateanism is trying to find the actual through line that connects the purpose behind each of these. Is that confusing? Yes, it is incredibly confusing, and it confused the living shit out of me when I was trying to study it. It turns out that Ateanism isn't even a real philosophical belief, it's just a honeypot created by Slaanesh to trap unknowing mortals and forcing them into insanity by reading some shitty book that a guy whose last name is Ateanos wrote called The Eris Transform. This actually upsets me. Perturabo met Hashut is the theory that the reason Perturabo, who was pretty opposed to chaos, turned into a demon prince is because he actually met the only chaos god and entity more grumpy than him, and that is Hashut. Hashut being a chaos god from the fantasy universe of tyranny and industry. It didn't happen, but it would be funny if it did. The Crystal Labyrinth of Tzeentch is said to be impossible to navigate, with so many dead ends, as well as its walls being described to be made of lies and deceit, which, okay, dick, that explains everything. But the exit to the labyrinth, as well as a hidden pathway leading to what is referred to as infinite knowledge, is protected by someone known as the Guardian of the Maze. There are 9 gates to get to infinite knowledge. This Guardian is going to ask you a riddle at each gate of increasing difficulty. If you answer correctly, the gates will open and infinite knowledge is yours. Allegedly, only one person answered all 9 riddles correctly, and it was a young girl with a small black dog. And no, we don't know anything else about her. That's just ominous. Chaos Grey Knights technically... Okay, they just don't exist, but there is an ancient legend about a silver-clad knight who ventured through the various circles of seduction to kill Slaanesh, only to get through all of them. And the second they met Slaanesh, they instantly became corrupted because Slaanesh is just that powerful. This individual ended up becoming the Purple Knight of Slaanesh. I like to think that this is a corrupted Grey Knight who in their hubris thought that they could force their way through and kill a god, which, albeit, they did get a bit closer than most people probably would. Alternate heresies are fan fictions made to tell what-if style stories about the Horus heresy, where some things about the heresy are different. Like, what if instead of Horus, that got corrupted by chaos, it was Rogel Dorn, and the current loyalist and traitor lineups were flipped? That's the Dornian heresy, and I really like that one, it's one of my favorites. Malus is the secret fifth god of chaos, who technically exists while also technically doesn't exist. He is in legal limbo where, due to some copyright shenanigans, his fantasy counterpart Malal cannot be used anymore. It's a long story. I made a video about Malus a while back. You should go check it out. But Malus is kind of free to be used in the 40k setting, as they're not linked to that as close as you'd think. He is kind of around, but he's also kind of not, and we don't know to what extent he is around. The Harrowing was a weird Xenos threat released by an ancient piece of Xenos tech known as the Echo Vault. These entities that don't have much of a description were so dangerous that simply being in their presence of them was enough to drive someone insane. They were sealed away once again, and the vault was sealed using actual tech heresy that was so foul it was wiped from the record to remove whatever stain was left by its usage, which means that the Mechanicus signed off on it as well as the Inquisition, and that has some dire implications considering how dangerous the threat must have been. Sanguinius fell to Chaos fighting Horus is an old theory that Sanguinius fell to the Black Rage and also likely to one of the Chaos gods during the fight with Horus, and the Emperor had to put him down. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, as we saw the fight between Horus and Sanguinius, and oh man, that was depressing. The Siege of Terra happening in an alternate universe is a tinfoil hat theory that there was a split in the timeline that caused divergences in canon, as well as weird differences in appearance for some characters. I think it's not real, and it's just writers forgetting how some characters looked 20 books ago in a 60-plus book series, but f*** me, I guess. The third orc god is real. I don't know how, but by looking through some obscure forum posts and cross-referencing with unrelated ones, apparently there is like a half-hearted mention of a third orc god pre-3rd edition when the lore was kind of, unionized and made into kind of its own thing. His name is, as you could probably guess, Bork, and we know literally nothing about him. I do know that Bork was retconned into being the name of an orc-inhabited planet, and the orcs who are on said planet call themselves the Cult of Bork, but you know what? That's just plain old interesting. The Pale Wasting is an Eldritch Abomination-style threat that exists in the Ghoul Stars. We do not know exactly what it is. It's sometimes described as a plague that sweeps through an area and kills everything, and sometimes described as a living set of creatures, when in 40k it could also be both. It was such a massive threat that it had to be kind of sectioned off so that people would not interact with it, which means that it's probably contagious. The fate of Ra Endymion is long and complicated, but basically there was a demon that could theoretically match the Emperor in power, a kind of rogue god of chaos, Dracnian. This demon could not be killed, so the Emperor transformed it into his sword, which he then stabbed into one of his most trusted custodians, Ra Endymion, sealed it in his body, and then instructed Ra to run as fast and as far as he possibly could, getting away from here and never letting anyone get a hold of the sword, which unfortunately ended up with Abaddon the Despoiler getting a hold of it and killing Ra Endymion, but it took him a couple thousand years, so that sucks. The Necron tier, where time-traveling humans, is a fan theory that suggests the universe eventually gets so for humanity that they have to travel back in time to save themselves, and thus they become the Necron tier. It is kind of a fun theory, but there is absolutely no way of confirming this. Layer 10, ForgeWorld.com. The cyclic nature of the galaxy is referencing that there is always a species on the incline, growing in power while another is falling out of favor due to their own hubris. Everyone has a time to shine in the spotlight, but everyone also has a time in the backstage in the shadows. The mainstay part of the cycle is the struggle to stay on top. The Eldar have been struggling to go back for millennia, and humanity is fighting to go back to what they just lost a couple thousand years ago. Thus, the cycle never ends. The Well of Eternity is a spot in the warp that is this massive mystical black hole. It is so mysterious that even the gods of knowledge, sorcery, and trickery don't know what is in there. Tzeentch has long since been trying to find out where it leads by throwing bird after bird into it to find out what happens, only ever having one success, Kairos Fateweaver, who came out technically blind, but he can now perfectly predict the future for the most part while also seeing the perfect recollections of the past. So there really isn't any concrete understanding about what the Nex is, so after I looked in a few places, I'm just going with what my favorite answer was, and it's that there is this kind of continuance fan fiction known as Warhammer 50k The Age of Dusk. I've known about it for a while because I'm a big fan of like random 40k offshoot fan fiction, and it's this big fan writing project that takes place in the year 50k, and it's an extrapolation as to what could have possibly happened to get there. The Nex is some eldritch being that plays the part of a non-chaos related major threat that might be some sort of spiritual issue that is not warp related, as when other things that are not warp related interact with it, it doesn't kind of interact the same way, you know, a ghost or a chaos being would. We don't know much about it, but we do know that saying its name out loud can actually cause weird ripples in reality, as well as cause people to go insane. Thus, we simply shorten its name to the Nex. The Starfather is likely a reference to whatever being did give rise to the Star Child, an entity of such great power that it could create the savior of mankind or could usher us into the grave. Or it's someone being cute and putting something on the bottom tier that makes actual no sense for some reason. Okay, this is a complicated one. But in Warhammer Fantasy in the olden days, there was actually quite a few Chaos Gods. This is in the early editions. Why do you think that the current Chaos Gods' holy numbers are 6, 2, 9, with Malice being a bit of an outlier with the number 11? It's because in Warhammer Fantasy, there were actually a bunch of dudes kind of lying around. I won't list all of them here. I might make a video in the future about them, who knows? Blackstone, from what I can tell, was created using extreme psychic and physical stresses from both the Eldar and the Old Ones. This was essentially a crucible type effect to make a material that could both harm and even kill Catan, which might infer that Blackstone was necessary to make the Catan killing weapons that the Necron had before. This leads us to understand why the Necron have adopted the Blackstone so well, as it's the best way to trap and contain the Catan. It also is just a weird magical rock that humanity likes to poke from time to time. There was like a couple billion years before the Old Ones were a thing and rose to power, so we don't truly know what happened before the Old Ones existed in the galaxy. I know that the Catan were created and the universe was kind of this nebulous area with no differentiation between what the warp was and what reality was, and thus the birth of the star-devouring entities called the Catan were able to be created without being necessarily a part of the warp. It's likely that the universe was a macroscopic version of what the primordial soup was when we were kind of swimming around in it, with the basic building blocks of whatever life needed to be fighting for survival. Thus, the star gods and the frogmen survived and moved on to create what we all have now. So chaos worship is kind of a thing. I had a buddy who actually used to practice practical chaos magic in real life, but it's basically the idea that intent and self-belief can bend reality, or make certain probabilities more likely. There are rituals, and it's usually pretty weirdly occult, but it is interesting. I'd recommend looking into it if it's something that you might find knowledge from. Rituals include the burning of sigils that you put your intent into, making symbols that have meaning exclusively to you and what you want to accomplish, then using them to evoke certain events. I'm simplifying it, but yeah, it is interesting as all hell. Everything is canon is in reference to that everything, even the stuff from the Rogue Trader days, is canon, though GW usually says this with a wry smile and a cheeky look in their eyes, as they also say that nothing is true, where they play the old unreliable narrator card, and some of the things back in the day that they were talking about just aren't actually true. They were just a story being told by some brain-damaged servitor or some shit. Nothing is canon is in reference to the player base who believes that the only portions they choose to acknowledge are canon, and thus technically nothing is canon. Like, there is nothing stopping you from, in your own headcanon, running an Iron Warriors and Imperial Fist joint narrative campaign where they are also best friends and their Primarchs totally make out all the time. Games Workshop is a collective hallucination is a common theory, as it might actually just be an MK Ultra psyop that was implanted in our minds so that the government can tax those who have a bit too much disposable income without them knowing. I personally like to think it's a mixture of hallucinogenic drugs and a brain parasite that resembles the chestburster from Alien. The Famir were the first race to truly worship chaos, and were one of the biggest threats to humanity for a short period of time. They are half the reason why the Primarch project was initiated after the Angel and the Emperor had scoured the entire planet of all chaotic taint. As the Famir, who had occupied a small cult-like space on Luna, the moon of Terra, were launching massive raids to destroy the subtle infrastructure the Emperor had only just begun. I'm fucking with you. There's no such thing as the Space Famir. I just made that shit up. And that was the ultimate obscure 40k lore iceberg, the most dangerous of challenges I have ever partaken in. I felt like I could die at any minute during my research. I got this bit isn't actually even close to being funny. I'm killing it now. But yeah, the research of these topics was something that was stretched out over many months, and I hope you all learned something. I am going to keep on going with this kind of energy and do what every YouTuber should. Since I'm taking on sponsors and taking on ads, I'm making a bit more cash. I'm going to start actually increasing production values step by step. It'll be a bit of a slow rollout, but you'll notice it over time. So yeah, with that being said, we're going to go into the announcements section of things, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And I hope you were interested in learning the more mundane side of things, but I also want to talk about my 100k-ness now. But to start off, officially, I have 2 editors working alongside me now. There is Alice, as you all know. She has been a godsend and has been helping me keep my channel afloat while I organize stuff in the background for at least a little while now. But now I also have Grom on my side, a recent addition that this is technically his first video, and he did a great job from what I can tell. Since I can afford it, I'm bringing him on alongside Alice so we can do something weird. Basically, I've been making 2 to 3 videos every week for pretty much almost 2 years now, with some breaks along the way, and so over the last month or 2 I decided to switch it up and have 1 week be 2 released videos and 1 paid video, with the next week being 1 long form video. And I found out that 1, y'all respond to the longer form videos better, and 2, I enjoy making them more, so it's a win-win. So what I'm going to be doing from now on is I'm going to try to switch over to doing long form content. Try 30 plus minute to 45 plus minute videos every week and see how I can stretch that one out. Hopefully I can do it, and with all the help that I'm getting and the support from you guys, I'll be able to do it. So let me know if you like what the changes bring, because I'll definitely be paying attention, as this video took a lot of effort to make. I will also remind you that I'm going to be keeping on making members only content for those who are Arthur Lords and above, but I just wanted to bring up that my normal release schedule is going to change a little bit. I'm going to be experimenting around a little bit and trying to improve things, change things up a little bit, you know? Also, thanks to the obscenely talented Lulzy art for updating the old Arthur icon for this new era. I think it looks downright pretty. Their social medias will always be in the description, as they are kind of the only person I want to go to for a profile pic for this channel. So yeah, make sure to support them. With that out of the way, I want to talk about something sappy. Sort of. Me hitting 100,000 subs. Yeah, who would have thought a YouTuber wanting to discuss how it is to hit the big funny number, but I promise this might be going somewhere that you might not expect. There's actually a gap in my script as I slowly take my glasses off now. There's nothing written here. Most of my videos are scripted with cue cards to tell me what to think about and what to say, just because it's easier for me to collect my thoughts, but what I'm going to speak about right now is directly from the heart, or, well, the rehearsed story that I've been thinking about and how to exactly explain it. 100,000 subscribers is a big number. I don't think I need to tell anybody that. It's not the biggest number on YouTube. It means less and less as days go by and people find ways to reach those numbers faster and faster. But I find with me, my channel over the last 1.5 to 2 years to kind of get there, it's always been something that I thought was an impossibility. And I always thought, oh, well, I would finally have made it if I made it to that number, that 100,000 number. That's when I'm a full YouTuber. That's when I'm a real boy, you know? And I'm kind of aping a bit that I heard a while back. I can't remember where, but I feel like this is a very common thing. But within the weeks going up to it, I saw a massive jump. This big push for subs that started to grow on my channel. It's coincided with an increase in views, and it's because of Space Marine 2. So the growth just kept coming and coming and coming, and I zoomed past 80,000, 90,000, 95,000, and as I was seeing it, I was like, okay, here we are. This is the thing. This is what I've been waiting for. I'm going to hit that number, and all of my worries will go away, and everything is going to be fantastic. And yeah, I wasn't really aiming for it. I was just kind of expecting it to never happen. So now that it was here, I was like, this is going to be something special. And I remember the night that it happened because I wanted to stay up because I was at 99.99 whatever % close to it. And I stayed up and I saw the number 100,000. I felt nothing. I felt numb to it. I felt like nothing changed, because ostensibly nothing had changed. It's just a number. And weeks went by, I ordered my plaque, got that, and I felt like I would feel something when I held it, but once again, I held the 100,000 subscriber silver play button, nothing. There was a tinge of melancholy to it, a bit of sadness. Because I feel like I should feel something. I should feel satisfied in my achievement. I feel like I should at least feel some degree of happiness about this, but I think it's just a number. And I feel like there is something interesting about this situation. I think my reaction to getting the plaque, getting the number, says something about me, and I'm not quite sure what it is yet. I want to keep going. I want to keep doing this until I can't do it anymore because I enjoy making YouTube videos, and I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I like enjoying this, and a lot of people seem to respond well to it. I appreciate everybody for watching. I see the comment sections of all these videos, and I scan through them, and less do I see recognizable faces, and less I feel like a person when it comes to interacting with these individuals, with fans, like with you guys. I feel more and more like I'm some entertaining cartoon that people put on to while away their sadness, and I don't fully know how to feel about that. I feel like I'm becoming less a man and more of a symbol in the eyes of those as the number grows up. I see a lot of people talking about me as if I'm not even ever going to see what they say, and the funny part is, I've been there. I was a little bitch boy growing up, and I loved complaining about other YouTubers, so I would talk about that in online forums with friends growing up, with the contemporary people that I grew up with, which was, yes, that guy with the glasses, you could totally smell the influence on me, but like, that was my main source of entertainment. But I see people talk about me that way, and I find it interesting. I find that more interesting than simply hitting a number. It makes me think how I want to interact with the greater populace of the 40K community as well as the fan base. It makes me feel like I should keep myself from thinking about it. I overthink everything, so overthinking this I feel could lead to some bad spots. But for now, I try not to think about it too much. And I try to enjoy it for what it is, not for what it isn't. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you, all of you. I hope there is continued success in the future for me, as I like providing you guys with this content. With that being said, thank you all for watching. Special thanks to those who support me through channel memberships, because with your help, I'm able to pay my editors and be able to actually increase my workflow, as well as I'm starting to invest more money into art assets for the channel itself. If you want to support me, great. Best thing you can do is just watch, subscribe, and just interact the way that you have been. And if you want to support me further, then become a channel member. Channel memberships come with a bunch of different perks. Main one being that you get to see most videos the second they're able to be uploaded, as opposed to waiting for the release date for them. And if you go to the highest tier, you gain access to 2 additional videos a month. So, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, and you just want to support the boy, then that's there. Thanks once again for watching. And before I go, man, it's been a wild ride. And you know what? I still think the Perturabo smiley face is really goddamn funny.